Isis and Osiris, he can't become lord of the physical realm and can't conquer death and going down in the harrowing of hell and returning in the resurrection. So what Christ is answering is precisely the problem set up by Isis and Osiris. And this is why you have to also read, I think, Christ as a male-female unit, much like, and the two Marys are part of what Christ is all about. So Isis and Osiris and Jesus and the two Marys are the next Magnus Annus, the next 2,000-year cycle. But my point in that digression is that Osiris is basically this wimp. He's a phallus. He just dies. That's all only thing the male can do. As the story begins to go on, these males begin to take on more of a personality, more of an attempt to stop the process of death, not to submit to sacrifice, and to, you know, have war with Ishtar. And this is what, of course, you get in the Gilgamesh epic. So the quality of the dynamic of the male as a dying figure changes over the millennia. But in this dynamic, what I want to describe as a possible way of thinking is that these texts and these mentalities create this formation of a mentality, the arithmetic, and then there is the dominant work, which is Inanna's descent into the netherworld. And dominant works sort of set up a pattern that will last for quite a long time. So the descent into hell is under the role of the woman in the sort of earliest form, and then as it gets developed, it gets taken over by men as we switch to patriarchy, and they change the sexes. So the figure who goes down into hell is Christ, or Odysseus will stand at the edge of hell and see the souls of the dead come out, or Aeneas will look for the golden bough. So this transvaluation of values is part of this shift of patriarchy. So when one sets up the earlier Paleolithic one, it's interesting to watch it as it unfolds through time and see the changes that go, and the changes from the power of the goddess to be reproductive to be seductive. When you move, say, from these Paleolithic statues to Inanna, you move to the slim, erotic goddess, and Ishtar as well, having power over men through sexual power. And this is showing that women are beginning to get displaced and domesticated, and now don't have the monopoly on reproductive power with the new military technologies. And so Inanna comes to the male god and says, I, the woman, where are my prerogatives? And Enki, the male god of semen, water and semen are the same word in Sumerian, says, Enki perfected greatly that which is woman's task. And he just sort of puts her down and says, you know, stay in your place. Men are chefs and women are just housewives. So the whole quality of change means that the role of the woman changes from this primordial generatrix of all life to this sort of erotic creature who is gaining power marginally or through seduction or revenge or a Delilah, Samson kind of figure. So the other change that occurs is when the mentality begins to be fully articulated. It's no longer folk songs with peasants churning butter and saying, you know, who will plow my vulva? Inanna, Demutsi will plow my vulva. And obviously churning the butter is meant to mimic the act of intercourse, and they're making fun of the shepherd boys across the way who are hanging their curds and whey, and everything is about food and is just the prehistory of folk culture before there is civilization. When you come to a dominant mentality that's articulated in careful mathematics and observations of the heavenly bodies, you've moved from folklore to priestcraft. And you've moved from oral folklore to literature. And so Inanna's descent into the netherworld as a dominant text is a very highly complicated astronomical work of priestcraft, and it's a written document. And it's a ritual in which they would probably perambulate around the top of the ziggurat, going to window into window and say, why does not Enlil show forth? And the planet Jupiter isn't there. And then they go to another window and the other planet isn't there. And then finally they come to the window of Mercury, and Enki is disturbed about his daughter. And it performs the ritual that now in this window they know precisely the time of the year when Mercury is going to be appearing in that window. So this is a level of class stratification and a transformation from folklore to literature, and from just erotic peasant culture to now stylized representations where a priestess will stand in for the goddess, and there will be a sacred intercourse with the people who come to the temple to have intercourse with the temple Heros Gamos, the sacred marriage, the temple consort. You don't want to call it prostitute. That's even a little later, where temple prostitution is the decayed form of that after another 1,000-year development. Now there is this ritual and there is representation, and things are being displaced slightly from their concrete immediacy. Value is beginning to be expressed in maybe metallic forms of exchange, like bronze tripods or gold cups or things of this sort. Numbers are beginning to become codified algebraically. Coinage is beginning to represent metallic values. This comes at the very end of this mentality. And ritual and priestess are beginning to represent what had been immediate in folklore. All of those forms of representation are at greater remove from the immediacy of the folk culture. And these are all characteristic of the dominant mentality. When you go to the climactic text, it articulates the central problem and finishes the mentality so that there's sort of no place to go but into another mentality. So the climactic text would be the Gilgamesh epic, which articulates the central problem of the dying male, the war of the male bonding couple to break loose of the power of the Great Mother, to fight the goddess of love and war, Ishtar, and to make a name for themselves, to create an ego, and a name is, of course, a name for the thing that dies, and to celebrate the form of the city. It's about the whole notion of containment. The poem begins with an ode to the walls of the city, and it ends with a return to the city and the whole notion of the container. So what you've got with the Gilgamesh epic is the central kind of quest in male bonding that will establish this pattern for literature for all time, whether it's Queequeg and Ishmael and Moby Dick, or it's, I can't even pronounce the guy's name in The Last of the Mohicans, Chingachgook. This whole notion of the Enkidu and the Gilgamesh, the male pair, and the quest for, resolving immortality and the attempt to fight the white whale. This whole pattern of the quest is something that the climactic text of the Gilgamesh epic sets down for all time. Now, in the riverine mentality, then the pivotal culture that begins to project outward into the next cultural ecology, of course, is the Phoenician. And they're helping to carry some of the Babylonian mathematics into the world, bringing in also metallic exchange and the alphabet, which is a representation of oral culture in this abstract kind of sign, which begins to, in the theories of McLuhan and Havelock, have an enormous impact on the reorganization of the sensorium. But the new cultural ecology has its, again, dynamic, I would say, of formative and dominant and climactic. So I would see the formative texts as being the Homeric epics that begin to present the whole notion of the shift from the notion of the arithmetic immanental female body to the dynamism of the traveling male, the quality of the container, the celebration of the wall. There's a nice kind of similarity between the end of the Gilgamesh epic, which closes with the ode to the wall, and Book 11 in the Iliad, where Homer says, as long as Achilles is angry, this wall, the wall that the Greeks build to protect their ships against the Trojans, as long as Achilles is angry, the wall will stand. But in the fullness of time, the gods will become angry and will wear the wall down. And so the gods begin to be described as forces of erosion. And Homer envisions a time in the future in which all these helmets and swords and bronze artifacts will be tumbled into the mud, because he's writing it in an Iron Age culture and talking about a time in which they were fighting with bronze. So there's this wonderful play about time. But the whole notion of the celebration of the wall is an understanding of this beach, this form of order that is at the edge of chaos, that the ocean is raging against it and the war is raging against it, and it stands briefly in violation of chaos and is an affront to the gods, but eventually the forces of the gods' erosion will wear it down. So the very kind of early ideas of the second law of thermodynamics, before you can have math, you have to have myth. The whole notions that there are forms that hold order against the dissipative structures of time. These notions are rooted in sort of mythic structures. In one that's coeval with this and was written down with its last textual form in the Library of Ashurbanipal is the Babylonian creation epic, in which the Great Mother is destroyed and killed by the male god, and out of her body, he builds the city of Babylon. And so the whole notion is the movement from chaos to polis. And women are seen as sort of bloody, violent, primitive, instinctual, and men are seen as kind of metallic and sky and more advanced. And so this whole shift from chaos to polis is precisely the same kind of dynamic that you're getting in Aeschylus's Oresteia. There are two works that I see that are not Greek that are really the root forms of Aeschylus's Oresteia. And one is the Trial of Horace, in which the whole notion of what is a father and what is a son comes up. And basically, the conservatives say the mother's brother is the one who's important because he's old and in power and has the force in his hand. Who wants this young kid? It'll just create dynastic war. And the whole trial says, no, no, it's not the mother and the mother's brother. It's the father and son and the inheritance of property by the son from the father, that what its culture is all about. That trial is the root form of what becomes the trial in the Oresteia. And the Babylonian creation myth, from the movement from chaos to polis and the celebration of the city at the end and the ode to Marduk, is the same root structure that's going on in the Oresteia. So the Oresteia is one of these dominant texts that sets for Western civilization this whole notion of the movement from revenge, from blood, from the Furies and the Irenaeus, to law courts, to rationality, to female gods that are born from the head of the father and not from the vulva of the mother, to the sublimation of rationality into a sublimation of violence into rationality. So the formative texts of the Mediterranean cultural ecology would be the Homeric epics, not Hesiod. Now for me, Hesiod is like kind of the sunset effect of the arithmetic mentality. So Hesiod is this wonderful window into this most ancient cosmology that takes us all the way back to Çatalhöyük. It's very much the cosmology where sexuality and the act of cultural creation is the act of reproduction. So how do we get all these gods? So-and-so begat so-and-so, and this god slept with this god, and it's all a genealogy, and the lineage of it very much is the last sunset effect, swan song of the arithmetic mentality. But the new mentality is more in the kind of vision of order and chaos that you see in Book 11 of the Iliad, or more the whole sense of the articulation of a large world space that you get in the Odyssey. Now, you have a bit of that coming in right at the end with the Gilgamesh epic, because he leaves this city and he goes to the edge of his known world in his journey. So it's very much the archetype of the hero's journey, to use Joe Campbell's phrase. But it is not, it's right at the threshold of the geometrical mentality, but it isn't really articulating this shift. But once you begin to get the new mathematics where algebra is beginning to express numeration symbolically through a representational displacement, and coins and Phoenician cups and tripods metallically are beginning to displace barter and express economic value and forms of exchange, you're beginning to get representations now carrying more charisma and power than the concrete thing itself.